Welcome back to Face the Nation. We're joined now by FDA Commissioner Dr. Marty Makary. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to have you here in person.
Good to be here.
So I want to get through a lot here, but one of the things we've noticed is this new COVID variant that seems to be circulating in Asia. I believe it's NB 1.8.1. It's a variant under monitoring. What do we need to know?
Yeah, so this appears to be a subvariant of JN1, which has been the dominant strain. So it's believed that there is cross-immunity protection. The COVID virus is going to continue to mutate, and it's behaving like a common cold virus. It's now going to become the fifth coronavirus that's seasonal, that causes about 25% of the cases of the common cold.
So you're thinking of it as like a flu-type variant, just a normal fluctuation?
The flu mutates about 34 times more frequently than COVID. The COVID variant mutation rate appears to be a little more stable, but the international bodies that have provided some guidance on which strain to target have suggested that either JN1 or any of these subvariants would be reasonable strains to target.
So you don't seem overly concerned about that. I want to get now into some of the recommendations that have been very specific this week from the CDC and you with the HHS Secretary in this video announcement on Tuesday, where Secretary Kennedy said the CDC was removing the COVID vaccine for healthy children and healthy pregnant women from its recommended immunization schedule. He then had a memo to the CDC rescinding recommendations for kids' vaccines, saying the known risks do not outweigh the benefits. Then late Thursday, the CDC said, quote, shared clinical decision making, which I think is just talking to your doctor,
yes,
should determine whether kids get vaccinated. Can you clearly state what the policy is? Because this is confusing.
Yeah, we believe the recommendation should be with the patient and their doctor. So we're going to get away from these blanket recommendations in healthy young Americans because we don't want to see, on the COVID vaccine schedule, we don't want to see kids kicked out of school because a 12-year-old girl is not getting her fifth COVID booster shot. We don't see the data there to support a young, healthy child getting a repeat infinite annual COVID vaccine. There's a theory that we should sort of blindly approve the new COVID boosters in young, healthy kids every year in perpetuity, and a young girl born today should get 80 COVID mRNA shots or other COVID shots in her average lifespan. We're saying that's a theory, and we'd like to check in and get some randomized controlled data. It's been about 4 years since the original randomized trials. So we'd like an evidence-based approach. Dr. Prasad and I published this in the New England Journal of Medicine last week, and we're basically saying we'd like to bring some confidence back to the public around this repeat booster strategy theory, because
your statement was not about repeat boosters. It says the vaccine is not recommended for pregnant women. The vaccine is not recommended for healthy children. That's different than annual boosters.
Yeah, at this point, we're dealing, it is a booster strategy. People would be getting the updated shot. So whether or not a young, healthy
kids who haven't gotten
so we'd like to see the data. We'd love to see that data
but on a
doesn't
practical
exist.
level, for a parent at home hearing you and trying to make sense
We're
here.
saying take it back to your doctor.
If their child has not been vaccinated, are you recommending that their first encounter with COVID be an actual infection?
We're not going to push the COVID shot in young, healthy kids without any clinical trial data supporting it. That is a decision between a parent and their doctor. And just so, I don't know if you know these statistics, but for 88% of American kids, their parents have said no to the COVID shot last season. So the vast majority of Americans are saying no. Maybe they want to see some clinical data as well. Maybe they have concerns about the safety.
I don't want to crowdsource my health guidance. I want a clear thing, right? You don't go with popularity. You go with, as you're saying, data. And when we look
so
at
let's see the data.
Okay, so the CDC data said 41% of children aged 6 months to 17 years hospitalized with COVID between 2022 and 2024 did not have a known underlying condition. In other words, they looked healthy. And COVID was serious for them.
So first of all, we know the CDC data is contaminated with a lot of false positives from incidental positive COVID tests with routine testing of every kid that walks in the hospital. When I go to the ICU, when I walk to we know that data historically under the Biden administration did not distinguish being sick from COVID or an incidental positive COVID test. When you go to an ICU in America and you ask how many people are in the ICU that are healthy, that are sick with COVID, The answer I get again and again is we haven't seen that in a year or years. And so the worst thing you can do in public health is to put out an absolute universal recommendation in young, healthy kids. And the vast majority of Americans are saying, no, we want to see some data. And you say, forget about the data, just get it anyway.
Okay, so on data and transparency. For decades, since 1964, it was the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, ACIP, that went through this panel recommendation. I mean, people watched these things during COVID. The report was then handed up. It offered debate, it offered transparency, and it offered data points that people could refer back to. Why did you bypass all of this and just come down with a decision before the panel could meet and make that data?
That panel has been a kangaroo court where they just rubber stamp every single vaccine put in front of them. If you look at the minutes of the report from, they even say we were generally want to move towards a risk stratified approach.
So why not let them do that in June?
So in the meantime, we don't want an absolute recommendation for healthy kids to get it. They can do it, and that committee will meet and make recommendations. But you look at the minutes of the last couple of years, they say we want a simple message for everybody just so they can understand it. It was not a data-based conversation. It was a conversation based on marketing and ease. And I've written an article titled Why the People Don't Trust the CDC. And it's in part from that blanket strategy.
Well, you're kind of telling them not to right now. You just said don't trust the CDC.
We're saying it's going to be between a doctor and a patient until that committee meets or more experts weigh in or we get some clinical data. If there's zero clinical data, you're opining. I mean, it's a theory. And so we don't want to put out an absolute recommendation for kids with no clinical data to support
you made this pronouncement as well on pregnant women. There is data. Researchers in the UK analyzed a series of 67 studies, which included 1.8 million women. And the journal BMJ Global Health published it. People can Google it at home. And it says the COVID vaccine in pregnant women is highly effective in reducing the odds of maternal SARS-CoV-2 infection, hospital admission, and improves pregnancy outcomes with no serious safety concerns. This is data that shows that it is recommended or could be advised for pregnant women to take this vaccine. Why do you find otherwise?
There's no randomized controlled trial. That's the gold standard. Those 67 studies are mixed. The data in pregnant women is different for healthy versus women with a comorbid condition. So it's a very mixed bag. So we're saying your obstetrician, your primary care doctor, and the pregnant woman should together decide whether or not to get it. 12% of pregnant women last year got the COVID shot. So people have serious concerns, and it's probably because they want to see a randomized trial data. The randomized trial in pregnant women.
The world moves on. And you published in the New England Journal of Medicine on May 20th, in that report you referenced, you listed pregnancy as an underlying medical condition that increases a person's risk for severe COVID. You said that. So then 7 days later, you joined in this video announcement saying you should drop the recommendation for the COVID vaccine in healthy pregnant women. So what changed in the 7 days?
In the New England Journal of Medicine, we simply list what the CDC has traditionally defined as high risk, and we're just saying decide with your doctor. We're not saying one way or the other. And the randomized
data
trial,
and information as well from you and your.
So here's the data on pregnant women. A randomized controlled trial was set up, and it was closed without any explanation. We wanted to see that trial complete so women can have information that in a randomized controlled trial, which is the gold standard, this is what the data shows. We don't have those data.
All right. It is still unclear what pregnant women now should do until they get the data that
I'd say talk to their doctor.
When do they get the data you're promising? All these controlled studies.
In the absence of data, they should talk to their doctor, and their doctor will use their best wisdom and judgment.
FDA Commissioner, thank you for trying to help clear this up. Up next, the potential impact of those new policies regarding foreign student visas. We'll be right back. We turn now to the top Democrat on the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. That's Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi. He's in Illinois. Good morning to you. I want to get straight to it. You heard from the Secretary of State this week that the State Department is going to work with Homeland Security to aggressively revoke visas for Chinese students, including those with connections to the Chinese Communist Party or studying in critical fields. There are like 300,000 Chinese students with visas in this country. The U.S. government already has a heightened level of vetting. What's going to change?
I don't know. There's not enough details, but what it looks like is they're targeting all people of Chinese origin who are on international student visas, because he's not limiting it to just people who might have ties to the Chinese Communist Party. And if they do have those ties, they don't belong here, especially if they're committing nefarious acts. However, this appears to be much broader, and it's terribly misguided, and it appears prejudicial and discriminatory. My own father came here on an international student visa, and I believe that these people are vital for our economy and for entrepreneurship in this country, and I think this is going to harm America more than help.
But you said if someone has ties to the Chinese Communist Party, they shouldn't be here. Does that mean all the students who are children of leaders, for example, Xi Jinping's own daughter, shouldn't have been allowed here?
Well, if they were engaged in nefarious activities and if they are somehow deeply connected to the CCP, I think that we should be very careful. But in this particular case, they're not only going after people who might fall in that category, but it's anybody who is from China, including Hong Kong, by the way, where people are actually persecuted for various freedoms they're trying to exercise, and who come here seeking to exercise those freedoms. So this is a terribly misguided policy.
The Biden administration did conduct heightened vetting, as you know, of Chinese students. Do you think that there is a legitimate argument for expanding this, that certain areas should just be off limits?
I think that you should definitely have heightened vetting, especially in certain critical areas, because we know that the CCP tries to steal, for instance, intellectual property or worse. But the way that this is currently structured looks very, very suspicious. And you have to remember that the people that are cheering for this policy, what Marco Rubio had called for, is the Chinese Communist Party. Why? Because they want these people back. They want the scientists and the entrepreneurs and the engineers who can come and help their economy. And so we are probably helping them as well as other countries more than helping ourselves with this policy.
The defense secretary is traveling in Asia right now, and he said in a defense forum speech that Beijing is, quote, concretely and credibly preparing to use military force. He said their military is rehearsing. Take a listen.
Any attempt by Communist China to conquer Taiwan by force would result in devastating consequences for the Indo-Pacific and the world. There's no reason to sugarcoat it. The threat China poses is real, and it could be imminent.
He did not say what the consequences would be. Are you encouraged by what appears to be a statement of support for allies?
I am. I think what he's saying is largely correct, but I think the problem is at the same time he says that, either Donald Trump or even him or others say other things that push away our friends, partners, and allies in the region and cause confusion. And so we need to be consistent and thoughtful with regard to our statements, and we need to be also very methodical about our actions in trying to curb military aggression by the Chinese Communist Party in the South China Sea and with regard to Taiwan.
Since you track U.S. intelligence, I wanted to ask you if you have any insight into what appears to be the swarm of Ukrainian drones that has destroyed 40 Russian military aircraft deep inside Russian territory overnight. Sources are telling our Jennifer Jacobs that the White House wasn't aware that this attack was planned. What can you tell us about the level of U.S. intelligence sharing with Ukraine right now and helping them with their targets?
I don't want to get into classified information, but what I can say is that it's a little bit more strained in light of what Donald Trump has said recently. The one thing that I can also say is that Trump was right the other day to say that Putin is crazy in the way that he's going after civilian areas in Ukraine repeatedly. And so the Ukrainians are striking back. At the end of the day, the only way that we can bring these hostilities to an end is by strengthening the hand of the Ukrainians. Trump should, at this point, realize that Putin is playing him and aid the Ukrainians in their battlefield efforts. That's the best way to get to some type of armistice or truce at the negotiating table sooner rather than later.
All right. Congressman Krishnamoorthi, thank you for your insights today. And we're turning now to the president of Wesleyan University, Michael Roth, who joins us from Monterey, Massachusetts. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
I want to pick up on something we were just discussing with the congressman, and that is this instruction to have new scrutiny of Chinese students, but also more broadly, Secretary Rubio said all U.S. embassies should not schedule any new student visa application appointments at this time. About 14% of your students are international. Are you concerned they won't be able to come back to school in September?
I'm very concerned, not only about Wesleyan, but about higher education in the United States. One of the great things about our system of education is that it attracts people from all over the world who want to come to America to learn. And while they're here learning, they learn about our country, our values, our freedoms. And this is really an act of intimidation to scare schools into towing the line of the current administration. It really has nothing to do with national security or with anti-Semitism. This heightened scrutiny is meant to instill fear on college campuses, and I'm afraid it is working.
Well, it is noticeable, sir, that, at a time when so many higher education institutions, Harvard, Columbia, Brown, have had federal funding revoked because of their policies, we find heads of universities are fearful of speaking out. Why are you not afraid of speaking critically?
Oh, I am. I'm afraid too, but I just find it extraordinary that Americans are afraid to speak out, especially people who, run colleges, universities. Why? This is a free country. I've been saying it my whole life. I used to tell my parents that when I didn't want to do something, I would say, it's a free country. And this idea that we're supposed to actually conform to the ideologies in the White House, it's not just bad for Harvard or for Wesleyan. It's bad for the whole country because journalists are being intimidated, law firms are being intimidated, churches, synagogues, and mosques will be next. We have to defend our freedoms. And when we bring international students here, what they experience is what it's like to live in a free country. And we can't let the president change the atmosphere so that people come here and are afraid to speak out.
But there are also some specific criticisms being lodged by members of the administration. Do you think that higher education has become too dependent on federal funding, for example, or money from foreign donors? Are there legitimate criticisms?
There are lots of legitimate criticisms of higher education. I don't think overdependence on federal funding is the issue. Most of the federal funding you hear the press talk about are contracts to do specific kinds of research that are really great investments for the country. However, the criticisms of colleges and universities that we have monoculture, that we don't have enough intellectual diversity, that's a criticism I've been making of my own school and of the rest of higher education for years. I think we can make improvements, but the way we make improvements is not by just lining up behind a president, whoever that happens to be. We make improvements by convincing our faculty and students to broaden our perspectives, to welcome more political and cultural views, not to line up and conform to the ideology of those in power. But yes, we have work to do to clean up our own houses, and we ought to get to it. But to do it under the gun of an aggressive authoritarian administration, that will lead to a bad outcome.
Do you define some of the protests that even Wesleyan had on its campus that were, critical of the state of Israel, for example, regarding the war against Hamas in Gaza? Do you consider them to be xenophobic by definition, anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish?
Oh, no, certainly not by definition. There are lots of examples of anti-Semitism around the country. Some of them on college campuses. They're reprehensible. When Jewish students are intimidated or afraid to practice their religion on campus or are yelled at, it's horrible. But at Wesleyan and in many schools, the percentage of Jews protesting for Palestinians was roughly the same as the percentage of Jews on the campus generally. The idea that you are attacking anti-Semitism by attacking universities, I think is a complete charade. It's just an excuse for getting the universities to conform. We need to stamp out anti-Semitism. Those 2 young people just murdered because they were Jewish in Washington, that's a great example of how violence breeds violence. But the attack on universities is not an attempt to defend Jews. On the contrary, I think more Jews will be hurt by these attacks than helped.
President Roth, thank you for your time this morning. We'll be back in a moment. Negotiations for a Gaza ceasefire deal continue as the desperation for humanitarian aid grows. Our Imtiaz Tayyib has the latest.
Gaza's Nasser hospital overrun with casualties after Israeli forces opened fire on Palestinians on their way to an aid distribution point in the southern city of Rafah. Health officials say at least 49 people were killed and over 200 wounded, many suffering from gunshot injuries. This man's brother was killed as he waited to collect a food parcel. This is wrong, he says. Let the whole world see this. See what the Israelis and the Americans are doing to us. They're lying to us. They say humanitarian aid, but then they kill us. Why? Palestinians say Israeli forces have repeatedly opened fire at aid distribution points run by the U.S. and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. An allegation Israel denies. GHF, which didn't exist a few months ago, is staffed with heavily armed American contractors. The UN and other aid agencies have refused to work with the group, saying it has, quote, militarized aid, which goes against all humanitarian principles, as innocent Palestinians continue to pay the ultimate price. This video is of 5-year-old Ward El-Sheikh Khalil from a week ago as she escaped the flames that engulfed the UN school her family was sheltering in. She survived, but her mother, brothers, and sisters were all killed in the Israeli strike. Asked what happened, Ward broke down. A rocket fell on them, she said, and they died.
And earlier, we spoke with Ward's uncle, Iyad, to see how she was doing, and he told us she keeps asking for her mother and that she is in serious need of psychological support, something not available to her or most children in Gaza.
Imtiaz Tayyib in Tel Aviv. We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you for watching. Until next week. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.